Hello everyone. Welcome to my channel. 1. The reactor had design flaws. The Chernobyl disaster is usually attributed to human error. Viktor Brukhanov, the manager of construction and director of the nuclear plant, was held responsible for the accident and imprisoned for violation of safety regulations in 1987. He was released in 1991. But now we know that the cause of the accident was most likely a combination of human error and design deficiencies in the Soviet-era RBMK-1000 reactors, and that many of these faults were known by Soviet experts but kept secret from Brukhanov. Some of these flaws were: the reactor can possess a positive void coefficient, where an increase in steam bubbles, voids, is accompanied by an increase in core reactivity. This can be produced by the usage of graphite as a moderator instead of water. The void coefficient is a number that calculates the reactivity of a nuclear reactor as the void content, steam bubbles, increases or decreases in the reactor's moderator. As steam increases in the fuel channels, the neutrons that would have been absorbed by the denser water produce increased fission in the fuel. In the accident at Chernobyl 4, conditions resulted in a positive void coefficient that was large enough to overwhelm all other influences on the power coefficient. The reactivity of the reactor increased as the steam inside the core increased. The core then became more reactive and produced more steam and more power, until extreme temperature and pressure in the core led to the reactor's failure, causing severe damage to a number of fuel assemblies, which eventually resulted in the explosion that destroyed the reactor. A lack of a sound containment structure or other enclosure around the reactor. The pressure in the core produced a blast that exposed it and leaked radioactive steam into the atmosphere. This could have been prevented with a reinforced gas-tight shell. Additionally, the power plant operators weren't adequately trained to work with this type of reactor. Unaware of its weaknesses, the reactor crew disabled automatic shutdown mechanisms to prepare for a test on the reactor would perform following a loss of main electrical power supply. As the reactor began overheating, a peculiarity of the design of the control rods caused a dramatic power surge as they were inserted into the reactor, leading to the rapid increase in core reactivity. 2. The real death toll of the disaster is unknown. It took almost 2 weeks after the explosion for firefighters to put out the graphite-fueled fire. But the fire wasn't the only threat, as toxic fumes, composed mainly of fission products iodine-131, cesium-134, plutonium-239, and cesium-137 were still in the air. Apart from the 2 engineers killed at the blast, 28 to 31 emergency workers and plant operators died of acute radiation sickness in the first 3 months after the accident. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, there were also 1,800 documented cases of thyroid cancer in children living in the region who were between 0 to 14 years old at the time of the accident, which is far higher than normal. This is likely related to the release of iodine-131, which accumulates in the thyroid. A 2005 report by the United Nations estimated that up to 4,000 deaths might ultimately result from radiation exposure from the accident. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster also increased unnecessary induced abortions due to fear of birth defects and effect of the radiophobia that spread among the people in the affected areas. It has been estimated that more than 1 million abortions were performed in the Soviet Union and Europe as a result of incorrect advice on the effects of radiation exposure, but these numbers cannot be confirmed. 3. Evacuation started 36 hours after the accident. Many people in Pripyat, located around 2 miles, 3 kilometers, from the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, began suffering from symptoms like headaches and vomiting within hours after the accident, but an evacuation wasn't ordered until 36 hours after the accident. This was likely due to the fact that the Soviet authorities were reluctant to acknowledge first that an accident had occurred and then the full extent of the accident. On April 28, radiation levels set off alarms at the Forsmark nuclear power plant in Sweden, around 620 miles, 1,000 kilometers, from Chernobyl. However, when the Swedish government contacted the Soviets, they initially denied an accident had taken place at all and only admitted it once the Swedish government said they were about to file a report with the International Atomic Energy Agency. Although Pripyat inhabitants were initially told that they would only be away for 3 days, the Chernobyl exclusion zone, officially called the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant Zone of Alienation, was created about 10 days later with a radius of 30 kilometers, 19 miles, of the nuclear plant. Residents never went back and Pripyat is a ghost city since then. The Chernobyl exclusion zone now measures approximately 1,000 square miles, 2,600 square kilometers. Around 7,000 people live and work in and around the plant, or did until the beginning of the war with Russia, and around 150 have returned to the surrounding villages, despite the risks. 4. The liquidator status. Civil and military personnel exposed to radiation while trying to mitigate the effects of the nuclear disaster were termed liquidators. Those who worked as liquidators have a similar status to veterans and are entitled to certain social benefits, although many have since complained of a deterioration in their compensation and medical support over time. Around 600,000 people were granted the status of liquidator. They were mainly men and women who worked on the cleanup and decontamination of the area, such as those who removed contaminated debris from the nuclear plant, those who worked on the construction of the sarcophagus, a steel and concrete structure to cover the exploded reactor and prevent further contamination, those who helped build settlements for evacuees, etc. 5. The contamination spread to several areas of Europe. The disaster took place around 59 miles, 94 kilometers, from Kiev, Ukraine's capital city, at a time when it was a territory of the Soviet Union. But with winds and rainfalls, radioactive contamination quickly spread to Russia, Belarus, and some parts of Scandinavia and Southeast Europe. Radionuclides settled in the soil and water, contaminating fish, plants, and the animals that ate them. Subsequently, animal products such as milk and meat were affected, too. Some forest food products and crops were also contaminated with levels of radiation deemed above safe consumption levels for a while. Fortunately, many radioactive elements released into the air are short-lived, but strontium-90 and cesium-137 each have around a 30-year half-life. These elements have been found in lakes, and they are also present in the water and fish of rivers of Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus, as well as in the air of the Chernobyl exclusion zone.